Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. If you're looking for any part, spare part, accessory, heated grips for your modern Vespa or pretty much any scooters, you know where to go, ScooterWest.com. So today I'm going to show you how to successfully and professionally install the Koso heated grips. These are by far the most professional install style grips you can get for the Vespas, nice and easy to install. They work pretty much just as well with any other scooters over many of the other motorcycle specific heated grip kits, in my opinion. This is the newest version, Hot Grips 3 on the Scooter West web store. So I have it wired to the ignition, kind of with the magic of video. I already installed this here and I'll show you how they work. So got the new grips installed, the throttle grip, twist just like it normally does. Hold that for 3 seconds and it will power up. You see that LED is red. That means the warmest setting, pretty much up to about 40 watts. So that's quite a bit of power. These get nice and toasty on those really cold days, but maybe you want to tone them down a bit. They got 5 settings, and based on the color, you know, is how cool they are, all the way down to about 7 watts for the pair of grips, where you just get just a slight amount of warmth through the grips. So I'll talk a little bit about the various options of the grips and we'll get right into the tools needed and how to install these. So pretty nifty, they remember a setting. I have it wired to the ignition. So if I turn the scooter back on, it's going to remember the heat setting it was on last. So pretty nifty, all integrated into the grip. All right, before you get started, let me show you the tools that will make for a nice, easy install. Need some various screwdrivers. These are Phillips screwdrivers. I got the Torx screwdriver, T25 specifically. Need a 17mm combination wrench to remove the mirrors. You gotta get a little medieval on that right hand grip. So something like a mallet is gonna be useful along with a wooden block. Or 2 wooden blocks and a regular hammer would do the trick as well. I got a diagonal cutter along with a needle nose. The 24mm socket, normally you use that for an oil change, but you'll see what I'm going to use that for later. Some Allen keys, take off the bar and weights and disassemble the throttle assembly if needed. Pry tool is always helpful. You're going to need about a half a handful, about 6, I don't know, these about 8-inch zip ties. The grinder is pretty nice, but if you don't have a grinder, you can get away with a drill, like I would say a 3/16 drill bit on a regular drill would do the trick just as well. To make the single positive connection, pretty helpful to have a posi tap because you could use this without splicing or soldering any of the wiring on the scooter. Makes for a nice safe connection. Pretty important to have dielectric grease when you're doing these kind of installs. The weather seal this to some point, keep the wiring from corrosion. So dielectric grease, you use that in spark plugs and battery terminals. You don't necessarily need to buy this big cheese whiz tube. Some of the cables, you can use silicone lubricant to kind of make them glide a little freer. So you don't necessarily need this adhesive cleaner for the residue that's from the existing glued on grips, but you could certainly use IPA, you know, or acetone, you know, some type of solvent to clean the grips. And even though the grips do include some grip glue, if you're looking for a higher quality install that's more permanent, I would recommend something like a 15-minute epoxy, 2-part epoxy, where there's a resin and a hardener. You don't necessarily need to buy that big of a bottle, but there you go. There's the tools and materials needed before you get started. So let's jump right into it. All right, so before we get started, I'm going to go over the different options that are available from ScooterWest.com. I've tried lots of different brands of hot grips or heated grips. The original Hot Grips brand, that's no longer in business. Another popular brand is Oxford Grips. They make good grips, but the biggest problem is the remote to control the heat settings is pretty bulky, and they got pretty bulky wiring. And you want to have a very minimal amount of wiring with these scooters that have a handlebar cover, which is pretty much all scooters. So if you look at Hot Grips 3 on Scooter West, this is the newest version from Koso. They got the button that gives you 5 different settings. They got a low voltage cutout so they won't drain your battery all the way down. They store the temperature setting, and they're pretty evenly regulated, just built really good quality. Like the rubber over molding's really good on these, and they heat up pretty evenly. Definitely get what you pay for with grips, and I find that the Koso brand's kind of one of the best aftermarket brands. So the newest version, they have nice thin wiring, which makes for a nice clean and tidy install. And other positive about these size grips is they're 120 millimeters in length, so they're very, very similar to the original Vespa grips, and they work extra good on the 150 Vespas. They include a cap that covers this up if you don't have bar ends, such as on this scooter. Nothing wrong with the original Koso Apollos that we've been selling for years. They're a very popular seller for us. I have a set here just to show you the difference. Definitely a lot bulkier grip. They kind of got a diameter that's similar to like a Harley grip. Some people may like that. They got a little bit bigger button, but the biggest downside of the original Apollos is the wiring, and they also have a module here. So there's pretty thick amount of wiring, so you got to notch out quite a bit of the plastic of the handlebar to do a professional installation of the original Hot Grip 2. We call them the Hot Grip 2 on the Scooter West web store. If you want the easiest installation, they're not going to be the hottest grip. These run up to 40 watts, so they get nice and toasty at the highest setting. There's also the Hot Grips USB, which are the Koso clamp-ons, and they go on here, and many of the newer scooters have a USB plug, but you got to keep in mind they're limited to about 10 watts, so they're about a quarter of the power of the hardwired higher-end heated grips that I'm going to install today. So I've done several videos in the past on installing the original Apollo grips, very popular grip option. I have a lot of people ask me about the OEM heated grips for the 2023 and later GTS. Don't even consider them. They don't even work, actually. It's supposed to be integrated with the dash, but they don't even work. They got an ugly wire that hangs lower than the installation will do with the Kosos. They're not special. They don't say Vespa on them or have chrome rings. There's nothing special about them, even though they're the factory OEM specified accessory. Just not good, you know. I kind of consider like the gold standard something like a Harley or a BMW or a Triumph, where all the wiring's integral and the heated grip is very integrated with the dash. But unfortunately, Vespa and Piaggio hasn't come to that point. And the next best is putting the Koso Hot Grips 3, the newest version of the Apollo grip. So let's get started. Enough of me talking. Gotta get your mirrors off. If you have a windshield on the scooter, you know, of course, take that off. We'll get the mirrors out of here. Sometimes you can just tap them off. So this is a 2021 Vespa here, real similar to pretty much any of the other models. If you want some specifics on how to take apart the handlebar covers, whether you have a 2024 GTS or you have an old Vespa LX, these will install just fine. Keep in mind, if you install these on a 50cc scooter, like for example, a Primavera 50, they will work, but if you leave the grips on too long, they may start draining the battery, because they do draw up to 40 watts in the highest setting. At the lower settings, I think they draw about 7 or 8 watts, very low, but just something to keep in mind. The 150cc's all the way up to the 300s, they have plenty of extra capacity to run the heated grips all day. Other options other than heated grips is just get better gloves. Some people like the heated mitts. I'm not really a big fan of them. I'm here in San Diego, so the coldest temperature we get is just above freezing. I want something nice and convenient, just like my scooter is, and I feel like the heated grips are the most convenient way to keep my hands warm, in conjunction with gloves. So a lot of people say the outside of your hand may be cool, but usually just having the extra warmth of the grip kind of keeps the circulation in my hands, and it's enough to keep my hands warm with, you know, mid-weight gloves here in the winter. Even in the summer on the night, sometimes it's just nice to have warm grips. You know, obviously on a hot day, you're not going to want them. So I got the mirrors out of the way. We'll get the horn cover. It's nice to kind of get everything out of the way. We'll probably take the whole handlebar cover apart so you could just do even ever so slightly a better quality install. You could technically just do it with just the one half. So we're gonna get the badge out of here. We're gonna use some sort of pry tool or a small screwdriver, pop that out. Again, just if you want specifics on how to remove the bodywork on your particular model, you just go to the Vespa Motorsport YouTube channel and you'll find lots of videos on different eras of the Vespas and how the bodywork comes apart. So, you know, and the specific details. So this body style was used from 2020 to 2022, how this horn cover is and how this handlebar with the LED headlight. 2019 and priors, another generation of the GTS, and then 2023 and later, the current is a new generation. The heated grips are actually the easiest to install on something like the Vespa GTV, just because it has exposed handlebars similar to a motorcycle. So you got the pair of small screws that come out on each of these corners, using just a small Phillips right here. And you're probably maybe watching this and asking, you know, what level of an install would this be? It's certainly not as hard as rebuilding a motor where you need specialized tools, but you definitely want to have some prior do-it-yourself knowledge and mechanical abilities before you tackle this versus just doing it for your very first project you're ever doing on a scooter. It could be possible. You know, but there's some electrical connections we got to make, and gluing the left-hand grip in place, and just some other tricks doing the job successfully. So the handlebar covers are loose, kind of tip it up, kind of pull the corners away, and then it will just pull right away. There's going to be a single connector that pulls away from the headlight on these LED headlights. This little tab is how you release the connector. The older style are even easier, where it just pulls off the halogen bulb. So that's out of the way. Perfect time to flush the brake fluid if needed. This scooter's had the brake fluid flush. It looks really clear in the windows. You could do a test on the brake fluid, but it looks fine. This has had the recall performed for this era. There's this extra bleeders that they put on the banjo bolts, just to point those out. Spider webs in there. And the next thing is I want to pull the back half of the handlebar off because it's going to make the job a little easier. You want to take a Sharpie and kind of mark where the grip stops. And that's only the case for that left grip. The right grip's the throttle grip, so it's going to be on a throttle tube. So a little different setup. And there's more torque screws in here, T25. Just make sure you put them in the right place because these are kind of short. If you put a long screw in here, you'll end up ruining the paint job on that rear handlebar cover. The other nice thing is if you remove the rear handlebar cover, it makes for the glove box to remove much easier if needed. But oftentimes you can get to just enough of the wiring without removing the whole entire glove box to do this job. And I'll show you the various wires that are safe to tap into for the heated grips. They do include their own harness that also has, I think, a 4 or 5 amp fuse. I think a 5 amp fuse. The grips do draw up to 40 watts, so just under 4 amps is the maximum they're going to draw at about 14 volts. And 14 volts is, or 14.5 volts, is when the engine's running and charging the battery could be that high. So, you know, kind of just keep that in mind. You don't want to put it on some circuit like your brake light and you overload that circuit and with your brake light going out and not being able to start the scooter. So I just pulled this handlebar rear cover away. A lot of times you want to get a rag under here just to kind of keep it from rubbing on other painted body parts. All right, so we'll remove the bar end weights. They come standard with the GTS. It's got the little bit larger bar end weights because they have the factory top case on the scooter. So 5mm Allen. If it's original bar end weights, they could be a Torx fastener or you'll need a 4mm Allen wrench, just depending on, go ahead and get these both out of the way. So I have the pair of grips here. They're already connected to the included harness. The right grip, the throttle side, has a 2-pin connector that's nice and small. And they have a small little tang right there to release it. The knife's probably not the best tool, but you could just push on that little tang and it will separate just like that. And the left grip, that also has a controller built into it without an extra module. It's got a 3-pin connector and it's pretty much works the same. You can release that little tab. I'm trying to do this with 2 hands, even though 3 hands would be extra helpful now. So go ahead and separate that little harness. So this solution is far more convenient than any of the older solutions from other brands or even Koso, where they make a separate little module. We used to mount that module on the glove box to adjust the setting. This is just super clean with the controllers built into the grip. Same with the heat level button. So you got this harness here. It's a little long because it was kind of engineered to work with a motorcycle, where you may go all the way behind the fuel tank for the connection. So ideally we want to have this little connection somewhere up in the handlebars. We'll kind of route it with some of that wiring. You can see it's got the fuse holder in here and the 4-amp fuse. And you have a ring terminal for a ground. Oftentimes I want to make a better ground connection than a ring terminal, but you could use that, ground it to the frame, and then a positive. And the best solution would be to connect it to something that's switched. So that's what we're going to do. But first things first, let's start getting the grips installed. So you can see this grip's stuck on here. A couple ways to remove it. You could take a razor blade and just cut it. There's going to be adhesive left behind. Oftentimes I can remove them without even cutting them, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so oftentimes you can get compressed air between the grip and the actual handlebar, and it will break away the adhesive. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you don't, no reason really to save old grips. And you see some of the adhesive still left behind, but that's one way to remove the grips. You can see my line kind of where the grip stops. You can see kind of the corrosion that's on the, whatever this zinc plating of the handlebars, kind of where the grip stops. And sometimes we'll just kind of position the rear handlebar cover to kind of get a reference of where the end. So this stuff just kind of rubs, whites right off, no problem. Pretty easy to take this old adhesive off. You can use some isopropyl alcohol, acetone, make sure you don't get on the paint, and we'll clean that surface. I'll use something that's a little lighter duty. It's this 3M, like I guess it would be Bestine was the old trade name for that adhesive remover. Put it on a rag, probably should be wearing a glove, but it's pretty light duty solvent. It will also take off that paint pen mark, but it's cleaned up that tube really nice. So probably the most critical step of the heated grip installation is making sure this left side grip is adhered to the handlebars. The right side grip is on a plastic tube, so they generally stay in place without too many issues. You can kind of do a test fit just to see how that fits, and it's definitely pretty loose. Kind of sit on the scooter to get a good idea of what the position is. You want the button so you can see the little light. And you want a little bit of the metal exposed, because the bar end weights actually do have a little bit of a flange that will kind of overlay onto that. So I kind of am pretty happy with how that fits, or where my position is, have an idea of what I want to do. I went in here with some 80 grit sandpaper, kind of scuffed it up. And again, you may want to use some adhesive remover to kind of clean out the inside. And there's 2 ways to go about it. The included grip glue that they include, but even better is you can mix a 2-part epoxy. Obviously you got to take extra steps not to drip it onto any part of the scooter, and we'll mix that up and kind of dab it in here with a popsicle stick and carefully put this in place and let it set. And the nice thing about 5 or 10 minute quick epoxy is it will set up pretty quick. Ironically, you can even hook up the wiring and turn the heated grips on to even make the epoxy cure even quicker. You know, once it starts hardening up, sometimes heat will help it cure even quicker. So you don't necessarily need this big of a bottle, but you know, here in a workshop, kind of do this a little more frequently. So the way these work is you want to put equal parts of each of the chemicals or whatever they are. And they usually have different consistencies, so they're kind of hard to judge. So that looks like, I don't know, a penny size there of the part B. And then we got the part A, it's kind of gooey stuff. We'll do another penny like that. That's a little bit thinner is what I find. This is 15-minute epoxy, so you don't have too much time to work with. I'll tell you, 5 minutes really difficult to work with, especially something like a grip. So maybe a 15-minute might be the best solution. You can do this on cardboard, or I'm doing it on this little piece of board here. And I've used a popsicle stick. And you definitely want to get this all worked in. We got the grip here. I have 80 grit. Kind of just go ahead and sand it up. Probably don't need to worry about cleaning out much of that particle, but all the way through, I kind of already did the whole job there. So, and we'll just get in there and try to do a nice even coating all within the whole grip. You know, some of it's going to get pushed as we're sliding the grip onto the tube, but it's pretty important that you get this step right and you don't mess it up, because once the grip's kind of cured in place, the idea is you don't really want it moving, you want it staying put. So if you want something a little less permanent, maybe your best solution is use the included grip glue, and you can put the last bit of epoxy on the actual metal tube itself here. And it's not so drippy that is dripping onto the bodywork. This is already, I could tell it's already kind of pretty thickened. And so we got the switch kind of, I'm gonna face it, I would say at the 4 o'clock position. So it's up a little bit, you know, pointing at the rider. And we're gonna probably have a towel ready to go if there is any drips. I'm kind of, looks like it's going on there pretty good. I know where my line is. And see how it's dripping out the edge. So make sure I don't get that on my jacket there. And I see where my line is. That's about as far as I want to run the grip. And I have a little bit of it exposed. And if you're going to put the end caps that are included with the grips, you definitely want to wipe any of the epoxy that's dripping out of the end off, because it's going to be pretty hard to get those in place. So I wiped up some of the excess, and I've double checked the fitment, kind of just put that all up. There's a little gap, and that's okay, between this flange right here. And then I put this bar and weight, and I have a little gap right here. There's still a little bit of time to move things around. Just a tiny gap on both sides is pretty ideal. If you need to rotate it down, you could. And at this point, I'm gonna let that set. I'm gonna walk away from this side. So the right side, usually it's even more difficult to blow off. Sometimes you can successfully get the blow off. There's kind of like a rib on the end. That kind of a one-way little, and it's starting to come off. But you know, if you want the quick way to do it, let's take a sharp knife, and you know, this grip's old anyway, so it's not like there's any reason to save it. And you could do the same even on the other, you know, instead of blowing it off, or you don't have compressed air in your shop. This works obviously the easiest way to do that. So, and oftentimes with these chrome rings, sometimes you got to cut the grip away. Or tear it away like it's doing right here. And then the ring will come off on its own. And there you go. So that grip's pretty much trash. Could use a razor blade to cut this off, but I'll probably grind off. As you can see, the grip is not gonna go on this. This is much easier because you have this stop right here. So we could stop just short of that flange. We'll probably cover up that little edge right there. The easiest way to go about this is just get the grinder out and grind these ribs down. And it's gonna make for the fitment. Sometimes you need to double check, but it is nylon plastic. A really sharp knife will also do the trick. You know, just to show you. So there's these little ribs right here. See that? They come right off, no problem. You know, just with you know, a sharp knife. So if you don't have a grinder, the sharp knife will do the trick too, to kind of take some of the material off. You don't necessarily need to take it all off. There is some give, and then you know, this, you could see how I could kind of carve it off. But you know, everybody loves a power tool, so you know, you can certainly go in there and just, this is the easy way to go about it. All right, seems clean enough. And of course we can kind of do a test fit. And it's definitely gonna take a little bit of effort to put it on there, but you want some friction. You don't want, that's the last thing you want, is the throttle grip, the spin with your heated grip, because as it heats up, sometimes things get a little softer. But I'll go ahead and take some more of these little ribs off. The knife there we go. Not very good for the knife when you do it that way, but it does a trick. Give me an excuse to sharpen it when I get home. And I'll warn you, you definitely don't want to pound on this too hard, because this whole assembly can only take so much force. You can actually damage it and jam it all up if you really hammer on this side. So just keep that in mind. You can see they have this little cable that kind of does a little twirl. So we'll kind of have the cable kind of hanging, I guess I would say, at the 6 o'clock position. And I think we're going to go ahead and try just like that. But I want to show you a method that's even safer, since you do have the handlebars all apart. So since we're waiting for the other side of the cure, you could take apart the throttle assembly with a 4mm Allen key right here. And there's a pair. And any of these modern Vespas are going to have 2 throttle cables, a push and a pull. And this is just the safest method. You know, you're not likely to damage anything. And at this point, you could take the mechanism apart. You have 2 cables. Sometimes you got to go down at the throttle body and loosen the cable. Camera doesn't quite get this, but oftentimes you could just derail the cables even without the. So there's our one cable's derailed, and once you have the push cable derailed, it's pretty easy to grab onto the pull cable and derail that cable as well, or pop it out of position. So at this point, I know where the position, because I already started putting this on, and we can take a wooden block and a mallet and carefully tap this into place here. All right, and carefully with a mallet, you can just tap this all the way home. And I'm taking care not to damage these 2 little tangs where the cables go in place. So, and we're getting pretty close. And sometimes if that's the case, you may need to flip it around. We could put a socket on the end and tap it a little past, because I want that little flange to be kind of flush with this rubber on there. That's too much of a gap. will kind of split the difference. So I got a 24mm socket right here. That works pretty good. You need that for your oil drain anyways on a Vespa. So a couple more taps, I think we'll be at a good position here. I would say that's probably good enough. I just barely see the tube popping out. All right, so we'll get the throttle assembled here. Pretty much put those barrels. So that's the pull cable, and then the push cable kind of comes all the way around. Use the needle nose, kind of get it back into position here. Again, it's a little easier if you go down at the throttle bodies and slacken up the free play on the cables, so make for this job to go a little easier. So I have both cables all hooked back onto the throttle pulleys. We'll go ahead and put this little half shell back in place. There's a little peg that lines up with a pin on the, or a hole on the handlebars. That's pretty critical here. So it keeps the throttle grip all indexed with the handlebars, so it's in the right position. There's a little bit of free play, you know, make sure these cables aren't touching the lever there. All right, pretty important that make sure the throttle is working fine, closing. So seems pretty good. So at this point, we can put our bar end weights back in place for our left side fixed grip. And you see there's a nice gap in both sides, pretty important. If you have this gap too thin right here, as the grip heats up, sometimes it will rub on the bar end. You'll end up with an unintentional cruise control. So at this point, we'll start to get the handlebar rear covers back in place. And with these plastic thread forming screws, best to go backwards just a little bit. Make sure you're not cutting new threads into the handlebars. And double check all the wiring, make sure there's nothing pinched. We have the gap right here. There's still a little bit of give. The grip's pretty solid at this point. All right, so now that we have our rear handlebars reassembled, I think the ideal solution would be this nice little thin wire. We'll just have a small loop past where this fastener is, and you can carefully grind like a little horseshoe shape into the plastic, you know, a notch for the cable to pass through. You can also do this with a drill if you don't have a grinder. So it makes a nice clean little slot, and we're able to push the wire right into that little slot right there. And make sure you're also missing the area where your windshield would go. So you can see the wiring's right up here. This would be a perfect time to add another zip tie that kind of hold the wiring in place here. Should have did this earlier.
You can't make it tight.
You could, but I don't know. It'll have a loop on the one side that moves anyways, so it's like, So go ahead and put a zip tie. You can see where they have some of the other wiring zip tied to the handlebars. You pretty much put it right next to the other zip tie right here. And when you have the front handlebar cover, you'll barely even see that loop. For the right side, the throttle side, we're gonna need a little bit larger of a loop because you have that quarter turn action of the throttle itself. So you want a little bit bigger loop. You could always do a little test. You know, keep in mind the front handlebars. You know, something like that is probably good. Make sure it closes all the way. I'm gonna do a little notch right there. pull that melted plastic out of the way, but the grinder makes a really nice little notch right here. And I'm gonna go above where the mount is right there for the windshield, that is. So pull the connector up this way. And this is where the Koso grips really shine. There's just very minimal amount of wiring that we need to put in place in the handlebars. When they have little controller boxes or a module, thick wiring, it just makes for a much more difficult install on a Vespa scooter specifically, or pretty much any scooter that has like plastic handlebar covers over the handlebars. So pretty much do the same, and that's in the little notch right there. Now at this point we have the pair of wires. They're kind of coming right behind where the handlebar covers are right here. And we have some slack. And you have the pair of connections right here. Go ahead and make the 2 connections. So the 3-pin connector. These are seal connectors, so they're pretty high quality. They kind of snap and lock in place. And you're gonna have some slack. And we can go ahead and have that right on top of the speedometer. You got plenty of cable that goes for our electrical source. And at this point, there's some existing wiring right there. I wouldn't recommend tying it to your throttle cable, but there's other electrical wiring, and we kind of have that bundled up nicely right there. And it's perfectly tucked out of the way. It's not going to be in the way of the headlight. And you can see the cabling is going to come down with the other existing wires right there. Actually, originally, they had this zip tie that goes around all the cables, but it's broken, so we're going to go ahead and reuse that, and that kind of is going to keep all the cables all tidy. Get one long. Okay, that works. Another long zip tie. There we go. All right, so cut the little excess off these 3 zip ties I set up here. And then this little, I guess they call it some sort of cable management that they've been doing for years on the Vespa scooters. And we're gonna go ahead and kind of route this power cable down with all the other cables. They all go down on that left side right down there, and you could even see where they kind of go on this side. So you can actually reach in there pretty easily. And send the largest part of it, which is this fuse holder, kind of down that tunnel. I'm not even removing the glove box. I just want to show how to make this job just a little easier. You could remove this left knee pad, as I like to call it. But there's some of the main wiring that kind of just goes down the tube right here, and we'll get kind of route that down past. And now I can feel it just right here, so kind of pull this wiring. And they have this nice thickly insulated cable housing on the system right there. So go ahead and put the zip tie that was actually just dangling down there around all these the cables. That's kind of the typical cable management for this era scooter here. So, and that kind of keeps it all bundled and kind of make sure it turns nice and freely. Let me get some, is there silicone spray? Oh, yeah. There it is. A lot of times you hear that little bit of a creaking noise. On the later years, they actually did put a silicone spray on a lot of these cables here. So you could, it's not gonna hurt anything, but it's gonna kind of make everything turn just a little easier. And just to kind of keep everything sliding a little nicer right there. So. And at this point, we could put the handlebar covers on. I'm actually going to leave it off because I do want to make the wiring connections. And the most logical spot to make your wiring connection, you could do it at the gray wire for the headlight, but my recommendation for your positive connection, you do have this built-in fuse holder. You want to have that nice and accessible right here. So right below where the handlebars is, you have this nice opening. This gives you access to where the ignition switch is. And there's this clip right here. You pull the clip out of the way and make sure your ignition's off when you're doing this, of course. And you could pull that clip away and separate the ignition. This is your ignition key switch. And this goes directly, those orange wires go directly to your fuse block. And the orange wires behind here, they're going to be your, the power that comes on whenever the ignition switch is on. So you can ignore those other two. This red with black wire always has positive on it. So probably the safest way you could tap those wires. And we're gonna go ahead and route the wiring back up, the positive wire, and we're gonna tap into that orange wire right there. So the easiest and safest way to do this is with a posi tap. You may want to put a little bit of silicone grease to keep the corrosion from propagating into the wiring. So the way these work is they straddle the wire, and it's got this silver plated needle in there, and with a little bit of dielectric grease in there just to kind of prevent corrosion. Then you thread this in place and it makes a nice stable electrical connection. And they're definitely a lot more reliable and better than those old Scotch locks that people use sometimes. So we're gonna have more than enough extra wire right here, so we wanna have the positive wire. It's got that little positive wire. You could strip a little bit more of it if you want, and we'll come back up with the wiring. And you go ahead and unthread this other side and you stick the wire in there. And it kind of straddles that pintle in there. So once that's threaded in place, the wire is in there and it's not going anywhere. So makes for a nice, good, positive connection. So the ignition switch has that little keying index tang and it lines up with that tube down there. Sometimes you got to wiggle the key switch itself or even put a little grease on the whole assembly. And we'll go ahead and get that in place. It's a little tight in here. So make sure the ignition switch is flush and this little clip is snapped back in place. And now that we made our positive connection, we're gonna go ahead and work on the negative connection here. All right, so there's so many different ways to skin the cat when you're making a ground connection. You could just cut this ring terminal off and use one of those posi taps on one of the thicker black wires. You know, for instance, at this headlight, it's got a black wire, that's your ground. There's other parts of the wiring harness, if you feel comfortable finding a solid black wire on the harness. One of the safest bets is just make a frame ground. Down here, there's a frame ground at the ABS pump. There's also a frame ground at the engine. So essentially this whole entire steel body is ground, especially for something that's like a lower current. So our positive connection is right there, and you already have this eyelet that's included. So we're gonna route it right through here. And don't think you could just use that screw there, because that screw is on the painted surface. So, and it's got a coating on it, so it's not a very good screw for making a ground connection. This is for an accessory front rack. If you had the front rack, you could probably use the bolt that's already there. But you want to grind a little bit of the paint away, and we could just go ahead and put a screw or a small bolt to hold that in place. And I definitely would put some dielectric grease because you don't want to have any corrosion on the metal since we are taking away a little bit of the paint. Everybody hates to probably see this part. So you only need a little bit. And we'll put some of that dielectric grease on that area. And then I'm going to get a small bolt and a nut. And that will make for a good ground connection there. So I got a Phillips screw and I got associated nut. This is even better. It's got that little star washer on it. 6mm if you're wondering the size, or 1/4 inch if you're going to Home Depot to find the hardware. And make sure you don't drop that nut down here. And ironically, these are the license plate screws. So go ahead and tighten that. Get your Phillips out and make sure that's nice and tight. So this makes for a good ground connection right here. All the wiring's all free, not moving around. We have the excess slack. You'll know that your fuse holder's right underneath, right with these relay blocks. It just happens to put that fuse holder in a good position if you ever need to access the fuse holder. And ideally, you could even just use this wiring right here to secure the wiring. So we'll put one zip tie down there. And like I said, there's a lot of extra slack that's not really needed, but you could just kind of fold that up. And just like that, nice tidy little package for the fuse holder. If you really want to be a trick, you can even mark it with a tag of some sort, say what it is. And I just tuck it right between those modules right there. And now for the fun part. Before we put the scooter back together and clean up, I want to make sure it works. So we'll turn the ignition on. No harm if you don't have the headlight connected. So we're going to hold that button for 3 seconds and it powers up. Right now it's on the orange color, and you just briefly push the button. So red would be the hottest temperature, blue would be your lowest temperature. It's got 5 different settings. You can just let it sit there for a little while. It's not going to hurt anything running it for a short period of time. And make sure they're getting nice and warm. You can already feel a little warmth coming through. So I think we're all set. Everything's all wired correctly. And while we're waiting for them to warm up, you can even start assembling the scooter. It's got the headlight. Headlight's not going to come on because they do have one of these relays in there that controls the headlight. But of course, sometimes it's a good idea to check everything and get this all snapped together, kind of in the reverse order. And sometimes the key is to get this center section snap on first. Kind of work your way around here. There we go. So the seam's all closed up, and we have our little gap for the wiring right there. Make sure it's all lined up. Close that gap right up, and the wiring's all nice and tidy right there. And we'll check the other side. So that's all closed up. Make sure the seam is good right there. I probably could have even made this loop a little smaller, but my thought on this little loop right here is better to have a margin of safety by having a slightly longer loop. So, but you can always shorten it a little bit by just pushing a little bit of that extra wire up into the hole right there. So another option is you could route the wiring into this opening right here, but it's always kind of nice when it disappears into the bodywork. Kind of gives for a cleaner appearance. And we have the single fastener in the center here. Snap the horn cover in place. We'll put the mirrors on, and that's pretty much the whole install there. Snap the badge in place, and we got some nice toasty grips here. So they look super factory. You have the nice controller button right there that easily indicates if they're on and what the temperature is. And ideally, you want to have the mirror head directly over the grip. So kind of get the mirror head just right over where that bar end is. So keep in mind this is, you got left hand threads on the right side and right hand threads on the left side there. This mirror head's a little bit seized up. Thanks for watching. It's a Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. It's time for me to get off this mountain. I see those storms coming. Mount Whitney, 14,500 feet.